So this is volume 12, and we're taking up in November the 2nd, 1917. So we're talking about chastisements for Italy. Continuing my state amid privations, pains and bitterness, especially because of the many evils that one hears about and the entrance of foreigners into Italy, I was praying good Jesus to stop the enemies, and I said, perhaps this was the flood you were talking about. Now this is very, very important. When Jesus said there was a flood coming, he meant an invasion. So you need to understand that, like the prophets of the Bible, that words are used in a symbolic sense. It doesn't necessarily mean a tsunami. My daughter, he said, the flood I was talking about was precisely this. And the flood will continue to flow and flow. The foreigners will continue to invade Italy. Now watch this. Why is this chastisement coming? She has very much deserved it. I had chosen Italy as a second Jerusalem. This is terribly important. God the Father had chosen Jerusalem in Israel, and God the Son chose a second Jerusalem in Rome. What I mean by that is that the centre of the church would be there, and the leadership of the church. Because in Jerusalem you had the temple and you had all the leadership of the Jewish faith. So that's the way it is in Rome. She, in turn, has disregarded my laws. Now, if you think they've changed, I haven't visited Rome for a couple of years now, but when I did, there were 400 churches and cathedrals in Rome, and most of them empty and unused. She has disregarded my laws, has denied to me the rights which were my due. I can say that she no longer behaved like man, but a beast. Isn't that incredible? That's the very low level of behaviour. And under the heavy scourge of the war, I was not even recognised. Now, the presumption that the Lord had was that in disaster we would turn to him in prayer. But you need some level of faith inside of you for that. So if even the First World War did not make them turn to God, then it means things are really bad. And she wanted to go on as my enemy. Justly has she deserved this defeat, that's a defeat in battle, and I will continue to humiliate her to the dust. Now, why does he continue to humiliate us? I want to give you Isaiah chapter 2, and it's verse 7, 9, 11. The pride of man must be brought low in order to try and help him to come back to God. Isaiah chapter 2, verses 7, 9 and 11. And Luisa, interrupting him, said, Jesus, what are you saying? Poor homeland of mine, how torn you will be. Jesus, have pity and stop this current flow of the foreigner. And Jesus said, my daughter, to my sorrow, I have to allow the foreigner to advance. Now, if you know your Old Testament, you will know that whenever the people of God really broke God's covenant and behaved in a beastly manner, he allowed foreign people to come in and invade them and actually conquer them, and sometimes take them out in slavery. It happened with the Assyrians in the northern kingdom of Israel, the Babylonians in the southern kingdom of Judah. They were allowed to be taken out of the country altogether. But the southern kingdom of Judah actually repented in its exile in Babylon, and so they were allowed to go back. The northern ones didn't repent, so they shifted all over the world. And that's one of the reasons, probably the reason, why Jesus said he had come to seek and to find the lost sheep of the house of Israel, because they were now scattered all over the world. So the church had to go all over the world to find the children of God. So Jesus said, I have to allow the foreigner to advance. You, because you do not love souls as I do. In other words, I love them divinely. You would want Italy's victory. But if Italy wins, it will be a ruin for souls. Their pride, listen to this. Now, only God could reveal this about us. Their pride would reach such a point as to ruin the little bit of good that's left in the nation. They would have pointed themselves out to the rest of the world as the nation that could do without God. Isn't that very interesting? And so, because the Lord can't allow that disaster to happen to the rest of humanity, it's got to bring this nation down. Isn't that very interesting? You couldn't get that from anyone but the Lord. Ah, my daughter, he said, the scourges will continue. Towns will be devastated. I will strip them of everything, the poor and the rich. It'll all be the same. They didn't want to know my laws. They had made of the earth a god for each one. And I, by stripping them, will make them recognize what the earth is. I will purify the earth by fire. Now, that purification by fire, if it is literal, hasn't happened yet, except in a limited manner in Australia and in America. Okay. For the stench it gives off is such that I cannot bear it. Now, that description I've just had for you is a very good description of Europe today. And so if the Lord, at this early stage in the 20th century, thought that Italy should be severely chastised in order to bring it back to God, well, then Europe is absolutely ripe for it. Okay. So before I go on, I want to give you Hebrews 12:29. Our God is a consuming fire. The fire is chastisement, if that's what you need. The fire is love, if that's where you are in your relationship with God. Matthew 25:41. Those who finally reject the Lord are sent to the everlasting fire. And 2 Peter 3:10-12. So Jesus said, I will purify the earth by fire, for the stench it gives off is such that I cannot bear it. Many will remain buried in the fire, and in this way I will make the earth come to its senses. It is necessary. The salvation of souls requires it. So he's more interested in the eternal destiny of souls than the comfort of bodies. I had told you about these scourges a long time before. The time has come, but not yet completely. More evils will come. So he's telling her that this purification by fire will come. Now notice it's 1917, and our Blessed Mother had said in Fatima in 1917 that the earth would be purified by fire. And she said that the fire would come down from heaven. Now, the fire that consumed Sodom and Gomorrah and the other cities that were in cahoots with them, that was a fire from heaven. And they were literally burnt. And when you go to Sodom and Gomorrah have been found, and you can still pick up the lumps of sulfur in your hand, and you can still light them. It's pure sulfur. And there are no volcanoes in the area within an aeroplane distance of the place. There's no earthquakes. Anyway, earthquakes don't produce sulfur. And usually volcanoes don't either, because they produce the lava. Okay? And so this was fire from heaven. And the evidence is still there. And the very interesting thing, you can get this on YouTube, that the very interesting thing is what we thought were hills in the past are actually buildings covered with ash. I will purify the earth by fire, for the stench it gives off I cannot bear, he said. And so he's interested in the salvation of souls. I told you about this before, but the time is not completely ready yet. I will make the earth come to its senses. I will make the earth come to its senses. Now, you can see that that has not happened yet. The earth has not come to its senses, has it? Yeah. And Luisa said, my Jesus, placate yourself, enough for now. And he said, no, you pray and I'll render the enemy less cruel. Okay, in other words, it has to happen. Now, November the 20th, 1917, you get the reason for the chastisements given. And also, he talks about the sanctity of living in the divine will. Continue in my usual state, ever more painful, my beloved Jesus comes and runs away like a flash. And he does not give me time even to pray him for the great evils that poor humanity is going through. especially our dear homeland. What a blow to my heart, the entrance of foreigners into Italy. I thought that Jesus had told me this before in order to make me pray. And when he comes, if I pray him, he says to me, I will be inexorable. In other words, it's going to happen. But if I press him by saying to him, Jesus, don't you want to have compassion? Don't you see how towns are destroyed, how people remain naked and starving? Ah, Jesus, how hard you have become. He answers. I want you to give a heading for the next paragraph. His concern is immortal souls, not material things. His concern is immortal souls, not material things. And if you've ever gone on a holiday to Italy, they have made the churches museum pieces and art galleries. I remember hearing an hour's talk on the art in one tiny section of Maria Maggiore in Rome. They've turned them into art museums, and people can get their art degrees by getting their lectures off these walls. But there's nobody praying in the place. Now, he's not interested in that. So Jesus said, my daughter, I'm not concerned about the cities. I'm not concerned about the great things of the earth. I am concerned about souls. Cities and churches and the like, after they've been destroyed, can be redone or rebuilt. Did I not destroy everything in the flood? That's Genesis chapter 7. And then was it not rebuilt again? But if souls are lost, it's forever. There's no one who can give them back to me. Do you see the issue there? Ah, I cry for souls, he said. They have denied heaven for the earth. Now you're talking about atheistic materialism here. The buildings are important, the economy is important, everything is important except the soul. They have denied heaven for the earth, and I will destroy the earth, and I will make the most beautiful things disappear, because these are like a rope binding him. Now, if that was so in 1917, it's infinitely much more worse now. Okay, so people are literally bound to the earth, and he's not going to allow it to happen. So I want to give you a few references there. Hebrews 11:10. Hebrews 11:10. And also verses 13 to 16. And I want to give you Psalm 49. Psalm 49 is a wonderful psalm. And if you want a summary of it, you'll get it in Shakespeare. Shakespeare said, they strut and fret their hour upon the stage, and then they are heard no more. Now, Psalm 49 is where Shakespeare got it. He talks about people having huge estates of their own and servants running after them, and then they're all herded into Sheol and they're never heard of again. That's where Shakespeare got it. It's the only reference I know where Shakespeare got it. That's Psalm 49. It's a wonderful psalm. And so Luisa said, Jesus, what are you saying? And he said, courage, do not lose heart. I will move forward, and you come into my will, live in it, so that the earth may no longer be your dwelling. That's Philippians 3:20. Philippians 3:20. Or maybe it's Philippians 2:20. I no longer live, Christ lives in me. But I myself may be your that I myself may be your dwelling. That's 1 Corinthians 3:16. Know you not that you are the temple of the living God. Okay? And in this way, you will be completely safe. Now, he means spiritually, but he also means temporally. When we're in trouble, we're much more inclined to want to be temporarily safe and only secondarily worried about being spiritually safe. He puts it the other way around. But in the divine will, you're completely safe. My will has the power to render the soul transparent. And since the soul is transparent, whatever I do is reflected in her. Now, this transparency of the soul is absolutely advanced holiness. And it means that transparent glass means the light can fully get through and you can see through the window. You can see everything outside very clearly because it is transparent, okay? When you go up into the volumes after volume 20, you'll hear the Lord saying to Luisa that she is transparent now. She makes huge progress as we go along. And the transparency means, of course, not only is there no sin, you can't have sin at this level in volume 12 either. Not only is there no sin, but the faults and the defects and everything are gone. It's absolutely amazing. And so the light of God's glory really genuinely can come without any opposition to this soul and through that soul to the rest of her. So whatever I do is reflected in her. So that is 2 Corinthians 3:18. Whatever I do is reflected in her. Okay. If I think my thought is reflected in her mind, and her mind therefore becomes light, well, 1 John 1:5 tells you that God is light. So you're being transformed in God. And her thought, like light, is reflected in mine. If I look, if I speak, if I love, like many lights, they are reflected in her because God is light. That's why they are many lights, regardless of what you call them. So we are in continuous reflections and perennial communication in reciprocal love. Now, that's a huge statement. Someone living in the divine will, you're talking about 24/7, 365, no break. It's perennial, there's no break. It's reciprocal. You are not only completely given to him, but he's completely given to you as well. And so these connections and these reflections are, if you go into a room with many mirrors, you can stand there and you can see 16 versions of yourself because you're reflecting in all of them. So all of his reflections are seen in us. And he said, since I am everywhere, that's Psalm 139, verses 7 to 8. Since I am everywhere, the reflections of these souls reach me in heaven, reach me on earth, they reach me in the sacramental host, and they reach me in the hearts of creatures. He's everywhere. So I want to give you Acts 17:28. Everywhere and always I give light, and they send me light. I give love, and they give me love. It's completely reciprocal. See, he told us to be lights, didn't he? That's Matthew 5:14. Let your light shine. So he says, I give light, and they send me light. I give love, and they give me love. They are my terrestrial dwellings. Now, will you write the little word tabernacle beside that, and you'll get it, because I've given you a biblical word, because right from the very beginning in the book of Exodus, when God became present to the people of God on earth, they called it a tabernacle. And so we still call the place where we put the Blessed Sacrament a tabernacle. And the Bible calls us, when the Lord dwells in us, that we are living tabernacles. Okay? So tabernacle is important. And when John says in John 1:14 that the Word became flesh, and most English translations say, and dwelt among us, the Greek says he tabernacled among us. That's why it's terribly important to know some of the original words, because the original words are much more rich than the translation. So he tabernacled among us. And he said, these are the places where I take refuge from the disgust of the other creatures. Okay. So I want to give you 1 John 4, verses 12 to 16. Now, after this, he's going to be talking about divine sanctity. Oh, the beautiful living in my will. I like it so much that I make all other sanctities disappear under any other aspect of virtue in the future generations. I will make the sanctity of living in my will reappear, which are and will be not human sanctities, but divine. Now, it's quite difficult for us moving from ordinary holiness and ordinary Christianity into living in the divine will, which is a completely different reality. And no matter how much it's explained to us, we still sort of think the other way, because that's the way we were born, okay? But he's talking about here about a new era in which people will be living at the highest level of their being, and they will be living the whole of their lives in the divine will, okay? So when you come to the very end of the Bible, which is Revelation 19 to 22, Revelation 19 is the return of Christ, 20 is the judgment, 21 and 22 is the New Jerusalem, and they're all living in the divine will, every one of them. Okay. And the measurements that they give you for the New Jerusalem, all I can tell you without looking anything up is that if you take the length of the wall at the side of the New Jerusalem and put it into modern measurements, it would measure between London and Sydney in Australia. In other words, it will be universal. That's all. I don't want to go into any other detail, just to say that means it's universal. Okay. So the church universal at the time will be living in the divine will. Isn't that incredible? Completely new era. And their sanctity will be so high, we would say so great, okay, that like suns they will eclipse the most beautiful stars of the saints of the past generations. Now these are all the saints whose memory we keep at masses daily, remembering how great they were and how wonderful they were. And Jesus is saying that people who live in the divine will be much greater than that. It's hard for that to take on board, isn't it? Mm-hmm. This is why I want to purge the earth, because it is unworthy of these portents of sanctity. There you have it. Mm-hmm. There you have it in one sentence. In other words, if I'm to produce this incredible thing upon the earth, well, the earth has to be cleansed. Is that? Or to use Greg's language, he won't come to sewerage. You can't get it more graphic than that, can you? Okay. So November the 27th, 1917. We're still talking about the sanctity of living in the divine will is exempt from personal interest. And if you're looking at the heading, please underline the heading, waste of time. Do you see it? See the waste of time bit? Now he's going to explain this. And Luisa says, I continue in order to obey. It seems that my beloved Jesus wants to speak about living in his most holy will. It seems that when he speaks of his most holy will, he forgets everything and makes one forget everything. That means you forget all about these chastisements and you forget all about all the things you worry about. The soul finds no other thing but the necessity, no other good but to live in his volition. So after I'd written about his will on November the 20th, which is the last one, Jesus being disappointed with me, he told me, my daughter, you didn't say everything. Now he's been at her for a long time about that, hasn't he? Mm-hmm. I want you to neglect to write nothing when I speak to you about my will, not even the littlest things, because all of them will serve for the good of posterity, even the smallest thing. In all sanctities, watch this now, there have been saints. If you go through the history of the church, the very first thing that appeared on the horizon were the penitents, and like Mary of Magdala and other people who followed her. And they would go out into the wilderness to do a life of penance because they realized finally who Jesus was and who they were, and they were going to make reparation on the earth for it. And so the penitential life was one of the first things that appeared. So you have Mary of Magdala and others, lots of others at the very early stage. And then they started the sanctity of obedience. Now, that's St. Benedict and St. Ignatius of Loyola and Bernard of Clairvaux and all the rest of it, setting up communities. And so they would take a vow of obedience to make absolutely certain they were doing God's will. Another one would take the virtue of humility, which of course was Francis of Assisi. We're the little ones. And so with all the other sanctities, okay? So you have the Carmelite saints who came along. These were to be the saints of prayer and so on. Now he said, I want you to be the beginning of the sanctity of living in my will. My daughter, all other sanctities are not exempt from waste of time. I love that. And from personal interest. In other words, I might want to become a saint because I want to be famous, and the only way to be famous in the church is to be a saint. Can you see something wrong with the motivation? Okay. Jesus would call that a waste of time, would you? Now that you know that the only motivation he accepts is love. As, for example, a soul who lives attentive to obedience and everything. Watch this now. This really doesn't apply to us. This would apply to people with vows of obedience in a community. There's much waste of time. Her saying and re-saying continuously distracts her from me. And she mistakes the virtue for me. In other words, she gives more attention to the obedience than to the Lord. You see the way we can twist anything? Like some people nowadays give more attention to the prayers than loving the Lord. I remember a particular community that I gave a retreat to some years ago. I was absolutely shocked. And at this stage in my life, it's hard to shock me. I've met a lot. But it was a community of sisters, and they were praying the mantra. And people think the mantra is okay. But the mantra is not actually prayer. And the mantra is, you use 2 syllables. And it's like dangling something before your 2 eyes. You have 2 eyes, so you need 2 syllables. So you can say morning, evening. It doesn't actually matter what you say. And they said, oh, it's Christian because we say Maranatha. I said, no, it isn't. You're having exactly the same effect as everybody else out there in the New Age movement doing a mantra, which is that you're dangling this thing before your brain, and your brain, it has a soporific effect on the brain, so they then become all quiet and they think they're in prayer. So they fought me on this tooth and nail, and I was wrong and they were right and all the rest of it. So I said, okay, one final question and we close the subject. I said, the question is, you're saying this mantra absolutely for 20 minutes. They said, yes. We're utterly faithful to it. I said, supposing Jesus spoke to you in the middle of the 20 minutes, what would you do? They said, treat it as a distraction. Proof that it's not prayer. I said, prayer is a soul in communication with God. And the ultimate thing is that he responds to you. So if you treat his response to you as a distraction, you're not in prayer. So this is where we can make anything, even something as good as prayer, we can turn it into a weapon against ourselves. And I only give you that example because it's a problem today. Taking a vow of obedience is a wonderful thing, but if you're going to be absolutely tied down and utterly tense and stressed up by disobedience, and you've got to give me obedience to do this and that and the other, so you drive God himself mad, you know what I mean? You would just drive everybody else mad. So she mistakes the virtue for me. Do you see that? The attention is on what you're doing. And if she does not have the opportunity to take all the orders, she lives restless. Another one suffers from temptations, and oh, how much waste of time. She never stops telling about all her trials, and she mistakes the virtue of suffering for me. We've all come across this one, haven't you? Somebody phones you, and 20 minutes later they're still talking, and they haven't said good morning, they haven't said how are you. And if you say good morning or how are you to them, you really are disturbing them. because this is just an onslaught of words. It's not communication, okay? And people can make that mistake. And they'll give you every single detail about every single one of their illnesses and their ailments and their struggles and their this, that, and the other. And they will not give you one split second to say, have you bent the knee before your Saviour? Have you said, save me? It would actually help, because it's a very short prayer. And so all the concentration is on their struggle or on their temptation, and it's not on the Lord. You see how clever Satan is, that he just twists something, you know. And many times these sanctities end up in ruin. Now, sanctities there should be in inverted commas, of course. But the sanctity of living in my will is exempt from personal interest, because you're not in it to become holy. If you are, you better exit. It's exempt from waste of time. You're only in it for him. And it's his will, and it's his kingdom, and it's his glory that you want. There's no danger that they might mistake the virtue for me, because I myself am the living in the divine will. There you have it. So the whole thing is about him, it's for him, it's through him, it's with him. Absolutely, it's Jesus. So it's Jesus living in us, Jesus working through us, Jesus praying in us, Jesus all the time. He said, this living in the divine will was the sanctity of my humanity on the earth. And therefore, it did everything and for everyone without a shadow of interest. Now, by interest, you mean self-interest. Because I've told you many times that the summary of the 36 volumes is divine will and love. And this love is a disinterested love. It's completely self-sacrificial love. And it goes out to others. It's no concern for oneself. So self-interest takes away the mark of divine sanctity. Would you give that a big, big, big notification there on your thing? Self-interest takes away the mark of divine sanctity. Because going through these writings, you get plenty of indicators as to where I am or not in the divine will. Therefore, if there's self-interest, it can never be a sun. Now, a sun is a source of light and heat and life for others. So you can't be a source of life for others. And if you go back to John 7, 37 to 39, Jesus said that anyone who really came to him and really drank from him, out of their own hearts would flow fountains of living water for others. So if you really are in relationship with the Lord, you're giving life to others. It's not to do with you. And you're not gathering merits for yourself, and you're not gathering brownie points for your final test and all this kind of stuff. That's a much more inferior state. At the most, as beautiful as it can be, they're only a star. And you know, the star by comparison with the sun is nothing. This is why I want the sanctity of living in my will in these times so sad. This generation needs these sons, that's people truly living in the divine will. Because these sons will warm the earth, illuminate it, and fertilize it. The disinterest of these terrestrial angels, now that's what he calls somebody living in the divine will. I think it's brilliant. Now, you need to know that the word angel in English is Elohim in Hebrew. And Elohim is also the name for the triune God. Well, when you're talking about God, it's a capital E. When you're talking about angels, it's a small e. When you're talking about a translation, we just call them angels, and you don't have any idea that these are emanations from the Most High. The Bible also calls the angels sons of God, capital S. And we're also called sons of God, small s. The angels they operate in the divine counsel of God. And you've heard Greg saying you go into the divine counsel, didn't you? Mm-hmm. And when these terrestrial angels, the ones living in the divine will, when you're in that place, you can go into that place of intimacy with the Lord and have him reveal to you whatever he wants. It's wonderful. That's why I think just calling people in the divine will terrestrial angels is wonderful. So I want to give you Psalm 82 verse 7. Psalm 82 verse 7 says, I said you are gods, all of you sons of the Most High. Now that gods there has a small g, and it's Elohim, so it's angels. I said you are gods, all of you sons of the Most High. And I want to give you Hebrews 1:13. The function of the angels on the earth is to help those on their way to salvation. So the disinterest of these terrestrial angels, all for the good of others, without a shadow of their own self. Do you see in why you need volumes 1 to 4 to get rid of the self? Will open the way in their hearts to receive my grace. Okay. So the people living in the divine will open their hearts to let the flood tide of God's grace come in, and because of that the whole earth benefits from it. Everybody benefits. And then he said, churches are few and many will be destroyed. Many times I find no priests who may consecrate me. Other times they allow unworthy souls to receive me. Now, unworthy souls receiving the Lord is 1 Corinthians 11:17 to 32. Eat and drink to your own condemnation. 1 Corinthians 11:17 to 32. Now, when he says, I find no priests who may consecrate me, one of the places where I've worked on the earth is the Transvaal in South Africa. And there was one diocese the size of Ireland, and it was run by 4 Irish priests. In other words, they had a territory, the whole size of Ireland, north, south, east and west, as their parish. And there was nobody else. They were absolutely killing themselves trying to get around to the people, you know. So sometimes I find no priests who may consecrate me. Other times the priests allow unworthy souls to receive me. And worthy souls do not receive me. Now, worthy souls do not receive me. You're talking about 1917. And there were one of the rules about receiving Holy Communion was that people who were trying to live holy lives, they mightn't be allowed to receive for a month, you know, and you had to nearly ask permission from the priest, could you receive communion, you know what I mean? And they were making it out to be something so astonishing. It took Pope Pius X to bring some liberation into receiving Holy Communion. Others are unable to receive me either because of illness or being housebound or whatever. So my love finds itself hindered. This is why I want to make the sanctity of living in my will, because in them I have no need of priests for me to be consecrated, nor churches, tabernacles, or hosts. But they will be everything altogether. Now, that particular statement has been grossly misunderstood many years ago in America and has caused the rest of us a lot of trouble because people came to the conclusion, I don't need to go to Mass. I don't need to go to church. I have everything in myself. And the Lord is not actually saying that. But if you land yourself in a situation where in the midst of persecution, where the Mass is no longer available, then the divine will completely compensates for everything. But when the churches are open and things are normal, you have normal church life. Is that okay? So he said, in them I have actually no need of priests for me to be consecrated because we become living hosts. You remember that? Mm-hmm. But they will be everything altogether, priests, churches, tabernacles and hosts. My love will be more free. Anytime I want to consecrate myself, I will be able to do it. Now notice the I want to consecrate myself. That's Jesus the high priest. I will be able to do it. In every moment, day or night, in whatever place they may be. Oh, my love will have its complete outpouring. So really you're talking about the time of the New Jerusalem. It'll be a completely different world. My daughter, the present generation deserve to be destroyed completely. But if I allow a little bit to be left of it, it is from these sons, it is to form these sons of the sanctity of living into my will, who on my example will repay me for all the other people are doing. So he's saying, if I haven't destroyed everything, it's because I want the divine will to start, on the earth. Then the earth will give me true glory, and my fiat voluntas tua on earth as it is in heaven will have its completion and fulfillment. So that has already begun in all who are living in the divine will today. So December the 6th, 1917. Why Jesus can never be pleased with acts done outside of his will. This is terribly important now. After having received Jesus in the Eucharist, I was saying to him, I kiss you with the kiss of your will. You are not content if I kiss you only with my kiss, but you want the kiss of all creatures, and therefore I give you the kiss of your will, because in it I find all creatures. It's terribly important for us to say to him, I love you with your will on behalf of all. I kiss you with your own kisses on behalf of all. I worship you with your own worship on behalf of all, to make sure that it's with the divine will you're actually praying. And because in the divine will you find all creatures, and therefore you can speak on their behalf. And on the wings of your will I take all their mouths, and I give you the kiss of all. And as I kiss you with the kiss of your own love, so that I may kiss you not with my love, but with your own love. So it's in the divine will we can adore, praise, worship, and love him with his own adoration, praises, and everything else. And therefore it's worthy of him. And you may feel the contentment and the sweetness and the gentleness of your own love on the lips of all people, because when we're doing it on behalf of all, we're saying, we want you to take it as if all are doing this. We're doing it for them. In the same way, if somebody was ill, you would do lots of things for them because they wouldn't be able to do them. And since people have all kinds of spiritual illnesses, we do for them what they're not able to do now. So they're covered. I think it's beautiful. So that you be able to receive your own love on the lips of all people in such a way that as you're drawn by your own love, I may force you to give the kiss to all souls. And then who could say all my nonsense that I was speaking to him? But Jesus said, and this is about divine will acts, it's wonderful stuff. My daughter, he said, how sweet it is for me to see, to hear the soul in my will. Without realizing it, she finds herself at the height of my acts. Now, when they say height, you really mean what we call the summit of a mountain, the very top. The summit of my prayers, of the way I acted while I was on this earth. So I want to give you John 14:12. My disciples will do the same works as I do when I go to the Father. She places herself almost at my level. In my littlest act, I enclosed all souls, past, present, and future, in order to offer to the Father complete acts in the name of all. Not even one breath of souls escaped me, which I didn't enclose. Otherwise, the Father would have raised exceptions in recognizing them and all the acts of humanity. In fact, as they would have been done by me and come out of me, he could have said to me, you've not done everything, and you've not done it for everyone. Your work is not complete. Nor can I recognize all, because you've not reincorporated all of them into yourself. Now, Jesus has told us many times that throughout his whole life, he reincorporated all our thoughts, words, actions, movements, steps, every single stage of our lives, and he actually made a divine version of each one of us. And so, nor can I recognize all because you've not reincorporated all into yourself. And I want to know only what you have done. In other words, the Father only wants to know what Jesus has done. So if you go to the wonderful prayer of Jesus in John 17, you hear Jesus praying for his disciples. And one of the things he says is, they were your gift to me. And I'm going to give this in my own words now, not Jesus' words. And now that I've cleaned them up in redemption, I give them back to you. And so you've got this reciprocal gift from the Father to Jesus, that if the Father gives all of us to Jesus, Jesus redeems all of us, the Holy Spirit sanctifies all of us, and then sends us back to the Father. Because we can only go back to the Father as we came out from him, you know. Therefore, Jesus said, in the immensity of my will, of my love and power, I did everything and for everyone. Now, in Paul's first letter to Timothy, I can't remember neither the chapter or the verse this minute, he says that God wants everybody to be saved and come to the knowledge of the truth. So, how could other things outside of my will ever please me, as beautiful as they may be? If they're outside of his will, they're outside of God's plan, and they won't have an eternal destiny. They are always low. Notice the word, we had height up above, and now we have low. This belongs to the low world. They are low, they are human, and they're finite. Okay? Instead, the acts of my will are noble, that's the height. They are divine, they are without end, and they are infinite, as in my volition. They are similar to mine. So for that, I want to give you Ephesians 3, verses 19 to 21, especially verse 21. They are similar to mine, and I give them the same value, the same love, and the same power as my own acts. I multiply them in everyone. I extend them to all generations and to all times. That's what's so absolutely marvellous about acts in the divine will. They cover all peoples and all history. What do I care if they're small? What do you mean by a small act? If I lift up this pencil, it's a small act. But if I do it in the divine will with love, it's totally different. They are always my acts being repeated, and that's enough. And then the soul places herself in her true nothingness. Now watch this. This is VIP. Will you write it beside it? Because I want to clarify something, and I was waiting for this moment. The soul places herself in her true nothings, not in humility, in which she finds something of herself. We make a mistake if we think that you can talk about humility in the divine will. If you look at the three planes of existence, the lowest one is the unbelievers, the middle one is Christianity, and people can reach a high degree of sanctity, and there you can be humble. Saint Therese said on her deathbed that she had reached humility of heart. Okay. Then you have in the divine will, and you left humility in the middle one. In the divine will, you don't have humility. You have nothingness. Mm-hmm. In humility, you still have a little bit of yourself. And in the divine will, you have nothingness. And therefore, God can be all in all for us. So that's an extremely important statement there. It's nothingness, it's not humility, in which she always feels something of herself. And as a nothing, she enters into the all. Now, in earlier volumes, Jesus said that the light, the sunlight, can go everywhere and enter into everything because it has no material substance. We would say it's a nothing. But when you get up in the morning and you see the light has managed to get around the blinds, it has managed to get under them, it gets under the door, it's so tiny, of course it's immaterial, that it can actually get into places nothing else can get into. So it's the nothing entering the all that's terribly important. Now I want to give you something for that. It's the I am not entering the I am. That is the complete formula. St. John of the Cross said, I am not the Christ, I am not the prophet, I am not Elijah, I am not. And everything he wasn't, Christ was the fulfillment of it. We are the I am not, and he is the I am. And when you put the two of them together, you get one complete thing. And when we go into the divine will as a nothing, as an I am not, then it means that we have no block whatsoever to God's work in us. Is that okay? So it's the I am not entering the I am. As a nothing, she enters into all, and she operates with me, in me, and like me, completely stripped of herself. Now, do you see the completely stripped of herself? There you have volumes 1 to 4 again, and why the early volumes are so important for understanding the later volumes, because we can't get on this stripping has been done. Now, sometimes the Lord concentrates on a period of stripping at a particular point in your life, but stripping goes on all the time, because we always have stuff that needs to be shifted. It's like you might do a wonderful spring clean on your house, but the following week you have to dust it. So completely stripped of herself, not caring about merit or self-in. Merit, you see, is the lower level, where you're after your own sanctity and getting a high place for yourself in heaven. Your self-interest is the same, what's in it for me. But all intent only on making the Lord content and giving him absolute lordship over our acts. Now, in the middle level, where we all were, we sang, he is Lord, he is Lord, he is risen from the dead, and he is Lord. But this time we have to let him be Lord. Okay. And you mightn't sing it, but you have to let him be Lord. Even when wanting to know what without even wanting to know what I do with them. In other words, you give him the freedom, let him do what he wants, and you're not even curious. So only one thought occupies her, to live in my will, praying me to give her the honour of living in the divine will. And this is why I love her so much. And all my predilections, my love, are for this soul who lives in my will. Now he says that over and over again, doesn't he? So I want to give you John 15:9 there. As the Father has loved me, in the same way I love you. And if I love others, because God loves all creatures, it's by virtue of the love that I have for this soul. Look at that, it's absolutely incredible. And which descends from her. Just as the Father loves humanity by virtue of the love he has for me. That's your John 15:9. And it's also John 14:15 and verses 20 and 21. So Luisa said, how true it's what you say, that in your will a person wants nothing and they want to know nothing. In other words, there's absolute surrender. If one wants to do something, it's because you have done it. One feels the ardent desire to repeat your things. Everything disappears. One does not want to know anything anymore. So you lose interest in the stuff of the world, and you lose interest in what other people waste all their time and money and effort and everything. It just drops off. And the concentration of your being is on the Lord and on what he wants. It's actually very simple. Life simplifies enormously. And Jesus said, and I make her do everything and I give her everything. She says, I don't want to be involved in anything. But really what you're saying is, I don't want to be involved in worldly things because the Lord is going to occupy her. I will make her do everything. And reaching out to all souls, past, present and future, for their redemption. So in actual fact, you're doing such an essential thing on the earth that all souls in heaven will thank you. Is that okay? So December the 12th 1917. So we're talking about acts in the divine will again. Continue in my usual state, I was fusing all of myself in the holy will of my sweet Jesus. I want you to ring the little word all. Sometimes I just say to him, I fuse all of me in all of you all the time. So I was fusing all of myself in the holy will of my sweet Jesus, and I prayed, loved, and repaired. And he said to me, my daughter, do you want a simile of the acts done in my will? In other words, do you want to have a picture of what this is like? Look up and you'll see the sun. It's a circle of light containing its limits, its shape. But the light that comes out of the sun from within the limits of its roundness fills the earth and extends everywhere, not in a round shape, but wherever it finds earth and mountains sees to illuminate and to invest with its heat. So much so that with the majesty of its light, with the beneficial influence of its heat, and by investing everyone, the sun becomes the king of all planets. And it holds supremacy over all created things, which needs it for life. Now, the acts done in my will are like that, only more so. As the soul does her act, it's small and limited. But as it enters into my will, it becomes immense. It invests all souls. It gives light and it gives heat to all, and it reigns over all. It acquires supremacy over all other acts of the soul. You can see that this is a very important message, because it's really explaining acts so clearly. So it rules, it commands, it conquers. And yet her act is small. But by doing it in my will, it has undergone an incredible transformation. Do you remember the way we used to say it? You desire it and I'll do it. Remember that? One of the little rules that Tony gave us. But by doing it in my will, it has undergone an incredible transformation, which not even to the angels it is given to understand. So if the angels themselves, who are much higher beings than we are, and they are completely spiritual beings, if they're not given to understand fully the enormity of the grace that's given to us, then you will understand the jealousy of the demons. Because Satan's thing was, I will not serve. And we who surrender to the divine will are serving everybody. We don't ask who they are. We don't ask what religion they have, or whether they have any or not. We don't ask whether they're worthy or unworthy. And the reason why Satan refused to serve was because, first of all, God created the angels, pure beings, spiritual beings, and of course like himself. And God is love, and he created absolutely in love, and everybody has to love. And if he created you, you have to love, otherwise you've not fulfilled your being. But he tested everyone, in other words, to see would you decide willingly to love. The angels, because they're spiritual beings, only got one chance. For the whole of our lives, we get a chance every second. We can change our minds, shouldn't have done that, and go and do the right thing. So we have this privilege given to us. They were only given one chance. And the saints tell us that the problem that Satan had was that God asked the angels to serve a lower being who were going to be made of flesh as well as spirit. In other words, us. That they were asked to love somebody that they perceived lower than themselves. And Satan said, absolutely no, I will not serve. Since the very beginning of the church has understood that we, the members of the church, have to serve people whom we perceive as lesser than ourselves. They're either poor, or they're sick, or they're old, or whatever it is, or they're refugees, or whatever they are, but they're perceived as not having the same privilege as yourself. And that's why Jesus said, feeding and clothing the poor and visiting the hospitals and visiting the prisons and all this kind of stuff. People who are perceived to be less than ourselves. That is the standard that you have to love. And only those who love come back to him. Okay. So since we are less than the angels, not even the good angels could grasp that we would be given the privilege to participate with Christ in redemption. Because after all, he was perfect and he was God and he was a perfect man, you know what I mean? He had two natures and all the rest of it. And here are we, and we're little nobodies, do you know what I mean? And we're struggling from our own defective past and all the rest of it. And they wouldn't be able to comprehend the enormity of the gift that's given to us. I don't think we can either, can we? The sheer enormity of it. Okay.
It's incredible.
Oh, it is incredible, yeah. So it's not even given to the angels to understand this. I alone, Jesus said, can measure the just value of these acts done in my will. I alone, in other words, God alone can do it. They are the triumph of my glory. They are the outpouring of my love. And they are the fulfillment of my redemption, because each one of us become little co-redeemers. Okay. And I feel as though repaid for the very creation itself. Therefore, always forward in my will. Isn't that a most wonderful message? December the 28th, we're still talking about acts in the divine will. And when I come to something like this, I say, how could he say anything else? He just said so much. But I want you to notice in the heading that Jesus wants continuous acts. That's the bit I want you to underline. He wants continuous acts. So Luisa says, continue in my usual state, and being a little in suffering, I was thinking to myself, how is it that it's not given to me to find rest either night or day or during the day? Rather, the weaker and the more in suffering I am, the more my mind is awake and unable to take rest. And Jesus said, my daughter, you do not know the reason, but I do. And now I'm going to tell you. My humanity had no rest. You remember right from volume 1? Mm-hmm. Jesus told Luisa he wanted her to be a replica of himself. So whatever he went through, he wants her to experience it as well. My humanity had no rest. Full stop. Even in my sleep I had no respite, but I worked intensively. And this because having to give life to everyone and to everything, and to redo everything within me, there's the divine version again, it was essential for me to work without stopping for one instant. And one who must give life must be in continuous motion and an uninterrupted act. So this is total heroism for little people like us. So I was in the continuous act of making the lives of creatures come out of myself and of receiving them. Now that's called the action of God in giving life in birth and receiving people in death. That's his majesty role. Had I wanted to rest, how many lives would not have come out? How many without my continuous act would not develop and would remain withered? So I want to give you John 3:5-8. Everybody has to be born again of the water and the Spirit. How many would not enter into me because the act of life of the one who alone can give life would be missing? So I want to give you John 5:21. So, my daughter, wanting you together with me in my will, I want your continuous acts. So, your awake mind is act. The murmuring of your prayer is act. The movements of your hands, the beating of your heart, the moving of your gaze, these are all acts. So I hope you don't think that acts are only words. Okay? They may be small, but what do I care? As long as there is the motion, the seed, I unite them with my own and I make them great. and I give them the power of producing lives. Okay. So I want to give you John 5:19-30, where Jesus says the Son can only do what the Father does. And here we in the divine will can only do what Jesus does. We imitate him. Okay. And so in the divine will, Jesus and I are one. That is Galatians 2:20. My acts too, Jesus said, were not all great in appearance, especially when as a little one I moaned and suckled milk from my mother. I enjoyed myself in kissing her, caressing her, entangling my little hands with hers. When I was a little older, I picked flowers and I drew water and other things. These were all small acts, but they were united with my will. Now what he's saying is all the small little things that make up every day, you know. But they were all united in my will, in my divinity, and that was enough. And, of course, in the divinity, they were so great as to be able to create millions and billions of lives. You see, our little minds just can't comprehend that once the thing is raised up onto the level of the divine, that it is without dimension. It's just, it's beyond our comprehension altogether. So while I was moaning, lives of creatures were coming out of those moans. I suckled, I kissed, I caressed, but it was lives that were coming out. Souls were flowing from my fingers, entangled with the hands of my mother. And while I picked flowers and drew the water, it was the souls that were coming out of the heartbeat of my uncreated heart. Isn't that something? Mm-hmm. And they entered into it.
Hard to comprehend.
Oh, it's nearly impossible. All I can do with that, if I want to try and understand that, is I would just sit there and I'd say, Lord, open my mind.
Yeah.
It's awesome.
Yeah, it's beyond us. And what he will do is give you a little drop. And he'll give you the drop that enables you to sort of accept it, knowing that the reality is way beyond our comprehension. Yeah. And that he's giving this to little nothings and nobodies, I think is absolutely brilliant, you know. My motion, Jesus said, was continuous. This is the reason for your vigil. When I see your motion, your acts in my will, placing themselves at my side or flowing in my hands or in my voice or in my mind or in my heart, I make of them the motion of all. Now, all means past, present and future, PPF. And I give life to each one in my will, giving them the power of my acts, and I make them run for the salvation and the good of everyone. Now, that little statement, that last statement, is for me the most consoling of all. Because when I was a child, the church was telling us that outside the church there was no salvation. I used to have nightmares about it. And I used to have nightmares about millions of people going to hell just because they weren't Catholics. And I couldn't cope with this, so I told my dad about the nightmares. My dad was very wise, and he was the one who taught me the scriptures until I was about 10. And he brought me to a scripture in John 10:10 that stopped the nightmares completely. And John 10:10 says, other sheep I have that don't belong to this fold, and they also must come. I must gather them. It stopped the nightmares. It was incredible, because I was really upset about it. Why should souls come to the earth? And it's not their fault if they were born Muslim. It's not their fault if they were born to an atheistic family. It's not their fault if they were born at a time in history when nobody knew about Christ. It's not their fault. It's an accident of history. And my dad said to me, you won't understand this, he said, but all I can tell you is that nothing is impossible with God. And from that moment, I wanted to take the gospel to the ends of the earth. Now, I had decided it at an earlier stage, but it absolutely clinched with me at that moment. Take it to them, tell them about it, you know what I mean? And it's the most wonderful thing that sitting in your own living room, making an act in the divine will, that you're sending out salvation to people past, present and future. I think it's fantastic. I don't know, it's very consoling for me anyway. So I'll do one more with you, if it's not too long. Okay. So December the 30th, 1917. The sorrow of Jesus because of those who steal from him the affections and the hearts of creatures. Now shiver when I'm reading this, and remember child sexual abuse. Continue in my usual state, my beloved Jesus made himself seen afflicted and was lamenting because of many who steal from him the affections and the hearts of creatures, putting themselves in his place within souls. And I said to him, my love, is this vice so ugly that it saddens you that much? He said, my daughter, it's not only ugly, it's awful. Imagine God using that term. It is to turn upside down the order of creation, putting themselves on top and myself below, and saying to me, I too am good at being God, which of course is Satan's sin of pride. What would you say if someone stole 1 million from somebody else and rendered him poor and unhappy? Okay. And now it's not just child sexual abuse that's in mind, it's also the fact that you can go to a priest or a spiritual director for help, and instead of sending you on to God, they kind of draw you around themselves, and then they're looking for friendship and they're looking for love. And we've had many marriages, if that's any help. In other words, they've put themselves in the place of God. So it's the abuse of one-to-one ministry, and it's the abuse of parent-child, and whatever it is that draws that person away from God by somebody else who is in authority. That's the issue, and of course that's the issue in child sexual abuse as well. So let me give you a few references before we get into this long one. 1 Samuel 12:24, Psalm 27 verse 8. There's lots more Psalms as well. Proverbs 3:5, Ephesians 6:6. Now you could go on and on. Jesus said, yet when they steal affections from me, it's more than stealing 1 million from me, because these are material and low things, but these affections are spiritual and high. That means you've drawn a person's soul or heart away from God. If one wants, the millions can be returned, but these never. So I want to give you Matthew 18 verses 5 to 10, where Jesus said that if a child is destroyed by an adult, that the adult should be hanged. A millstone put around their necks and thrown into the sea. That's pretty strong language, isn't it? So these sins are irreparable and they're uncancelable thefts. Now, he is talking. I think it's unbelievable, irreparable and uncancelable. But we've had so much evidence given to us over the media of people who have never recovered from something that happened in their childhood. They've just never recovered. And if the fire of purgatory will purify these souls, it will never be able to return and fill the void of one single affection that they took away from me. Isn't that something else? Yet this is not taken into account. On the contrary, it seems that some go along selling these affections. You know what that is, don't you? It's child prostitution and the trafficking of human beings. Okay. So I want to give you 1 Corinthians 5 verses 10 to 15. 1 Corinthians 5 verses 10 to 15. And Matthew 23 verse 15. Selling these affections and they are content only when they find one who buys them to make a purchase of someone else's affection without having any scruple. You're dealing with prostitution and human trafficking there. They have scruples if they steal from creatures, but not if they steal from me, and they do not give it a thought. Ah, my daughter, I gave everything to my children, and I said, take anything you want for yourself, but for me, leave me only your heart. Deuteronomy 6:5. My son, give me your heart. Also Deuteronomy 8:2. And Deuteronomy 10:12, etc. Give me your heart. Yet he said, this is what they deny me, and not only this, but they steal the affections of others. And this is not only from secular people, but also from sacred people and pious souls. And this is 1918 language. So secular, let's take sacred people, that would be priests and bishops. Pious souls are probably religious. And so the secular people is what we would call lay. Okay? Oh, how many evils do they do by certain direction. Now, this bit here now is the problem of spiritual directors drawing people away from God instead of drawing them close to God. By certain directions too sweet, by unnecessary compliances, by too much listening, by attractive manners. In other words, you're using yourself to attract this person. Instead of doing good, it is a maze that they form around souls. And when I am forced to enter into those hearts, I would rather flee, seeing that the affections are not mine and the heart is not mine. Okay. I should give you there Jeremiah 17, 9 to 10. The heart is perverse and it's utterly devious. We'd do anything than give God his due. So the heart is not mine, Jesus said, and this from whom? From one who should reorder souls in me. So you're talking about a spiritual director or a priest. On the contrary, he has taken my place, and I feel such nausea that I cannot adapt to being in those hearts. But I'm forced to stay until the accidents are consumed. That's Holy Communion. So he's talking about priests there. What a slaughter of souls. These are the true wounds of my church. In other words, this is the abuse that goes on and people don't even see it. This is the reason for so many ministers being snatched from churches. And no matter how many prayers they say to me, I don't listen. Now, ministers snatched from churches. If you're in a spiritual direction situation, a person is telling that priest very intimate things about themselves. So we've ended up with lots of marriages as a result of it.
Lots of what?
Marriages.
Oh.
In other words, they fell in love with each other.
Yeah.
The priest didn't bring the soul to God. See what I mean? The ministers being snatched from churches. You see, he says it so delicately, I have to say it crudely to make sure you get it. And no matter how many prayers they say to me, I don't listen. There are no graces for them. Rather, I answer them with the sorrowful cry of my heart, thieves, move out of my sanctuary. Oh, isn't that strong? But I cannot stand you anymore. So I want to give you Amos 1:2. And I want to give you Numbers 12, 1 to 16. Luisa said she remained frightened hearing this. And she said, placate yourself, Jesus. Look at us within yourself as the fruit of your blood, your wounds, and change the scourges into graces. Then he added, things will go forward. I will humiliate man to the dust. Again, that's Isaiah chapter 2, verses 7, 9, 11. I will humiliate man to the dust.
Verses.
7, 9, 11. And there will be various sudden and unexpected incidents will continue to occur to confound man even more. In other words, things will happen that the scientists can't explain. And where he believes to find escape, he will find a trap. Where he expects victory, he will find defeat. Where he expects light, he will get darkness. And he himself will say, I am blind. That's John 9:41. We're not blind, surely. That's John 9:41. He will say, I am blind and I don't know what else to do. And the destructive sword will continue to devastate until everything is purified. I want to give you there Revelation 6, verses 15 and 16. Now the next one is short, so I'll give you that because it's the same subject. January the 27th, 1918. Days are most bitter, Luisa said. Sweet Jesus almost does not come, and when he does, he comes like a flash, and in that flash he makes himself seen while he dries his tears, and without giving the reason he runs away. Okay. Finally, after many hardships, he told me, my daughter, after so long that you have been with me, you still have not learned to know my ways. Now, there's so many scriptures I can give you on that. She's talking here as if she doesn't know that he's always away when things are bad. He's crying when human beings have to be chastised, and he loves them, and he would prefer to save them than chastise them. So I want to give you John 14:9. Philip, have I been all this time with you and you still don't know me? Do you remember? I want to give you Psalm 95, verse 10. Romans 11:33. And Isaiah 55, verses 8 and 9. Isaiah 55, verses 8 and 9. He said, you know the reason for my absence. I've told you many times how easily you forget my words. Things will rage more. In other words, they're not finished killing each other yet. Then, finding myself outside of myself, I saw, and they were saying that 2 or 3 nations will be rendered powerless to defend themselves. How many miseries, how many ruins, because other nations were clutching them so tightly to the point of laying hands on them in such a way that they will remain powerless. This is all the country grabbing that goes on in World War I and World War II. It's absolutely terrible. You know, they changed the map and Britain grabbed countries in Africa, and so did France, just to give you one example. Okay. And then we had the Hungarian Empire disappeared. Do you remember? Mm-hmm. Famous empire of the Habsburgs, that disappeared as well. So all of that was going on, and so they were literally turning the world upside down. So I'm going to leave it there for tonight.